was supposed to be a carefree getaway. The warm breeze on my skin, the sound of waves, and the golden light of dusk should have felt perfect. My girlfriend Amy, our friends Kevin and Lisa, and I had driven hours to spend the weekend camping on this quiet stretch of beach, far from city lights. We unloaded our gear, tents, sleeping bags, firewood, and laughed as Kevin joked about how my city boy habits were no match for real camping. The sky was painted in streaks of pink and orange when we finished setting up. Amy and Lisa lit the campfire while Kevin and I took turns kicking a rugby ball into the fading light near the sand dunes. The sand was still warm from the day as we staked down the tent and arranged sleeping bags in a circle. By the time darkness fell, we were tired from the drive but excited to unwind together under the stars. We sat around the fire, the flickering flames dancing on our faces. A small speaker played an acoustic guitar playlist quietly in the background. We roasted marshmallows and told silly jokes to pass the time. Amy playfully defended her seagull-fried marshmallow creation from Kevin, who teased that the seabirds seemed to be enjoying her treats more than him. I smiled at them, feeling the warmth of both the fire and good company as I leaned back in my beach chair under the clear night sky. It really did feel miles away from school and work, like we'd slipped into another world that had only our little camp for company. The stars above were bright and countless. Occasionally a shooting star would carve across the horizon, and we would laugh and make wishes. After a few minutes of those silly pleasantries, Kevin suggested we spice things up with a scary story. I cleared my throat and told one I'd heard on Amy's favorite narration channel. "All right, listen," I said. "It's about a college student camping by a lake who hears footsteps outside his tent all night." Amy groaned but scooted closer, wrapping her arms around her knees. Lisa and Kevin leaned in, eager for a chill. I wove a dramatic tale about a lone camper and a figure circling his tent in the dark. At the climax, I had them tense up, then delivered a ridiculous twist to lighten the mood. They all burst out laughing. For a moment, it was easy to forget anything was wrong. We caught our breath, and I glanced toward the dunes again. Moonlight lit the tops of the grasses, and I thought I saw something moving in the shadows just beyond our torchlight. A tall, dark silhouette between the sea oats. My stomach dropped and the tiki torch flame sputtered, making the sudden movement tremble in its glow. "Did you guys see that?" I blurted out, my voice a bit shaky. Amy and Lisa both turned at once toward where I was pointing. Kevin shook his head and chuckled. "Nah, man, you're probably imagining things. We just told that crazy story. Maybe it's your shadow." Amy rubbed her arms. "It's a little chilly. Who'd actually be out here on the beach right now?" she asked quietly, but her voice wavered. I forced a reassuring smile. "You're right. We've been in here too long." "I'm sure it was just the firelight tricking our eyes," I said, trying to make it light. We went back to eating s'mores, but the mood had changed. Forcing ourselves to laugh, we continued munching quietly. I popped another marshmallow in my mouth, but it was burnt on the outside and crunched unpleasantly. Even Kevin seemed distracted, shoving half-melted s'mores into his face. None of us were really hungry. The usual fun had drained away. The warmth of the campfire couldn't keep the chill off anymore, and I found myself brushing my arms as if waiting for more heat. Then a strange smell drifted in on the breeze. I sniffed the air and frowned. It was musty smoke mixed with something else, like damp leaves burning. Amy sat up. "Guys, do you smell that?" she asked. Kevin waved his arm dismissively. "Hey, probably just our smoke or someone's campfire from way down the beach," he said. Lisa shook her head. "No, this is different. It smells rotten. Like a wet forest after a fire," she said, her voice low. My heart thumped in response. I stood and scanned the dark stretch of shore. There was nothing there. No lights, no flames, just the black outline of the ocean against the night sky. If anyone had a bonfire, we'd see it. The distant roar of waves was the only sound. "Okay, let's just call it a night," Kevin said, his voice sounding a bit forced. We all agreed quickly. We stamped out the coals, drowning the fire in sand until it was completely black. The heat instantly vanished. Amy grabbed her blanket and hugged herself. "It just got really cold," she said. I watched the tiny glowing embers die. For a moment, the world felt completely silent once the fire was gone. We gathered our gear. Kevin picked up the empty marshmallow sticks while Lisa folded the cooler. We all moved quickly, eager to leave the dark dunes behind. The walk back to the tent was fast and quiet. The sand was cool under our feet. I felt my pulse still racing. We were all silent as we reached the tent, each of us lost in our thoughts. Inside the tent, I turned on the lantern and zippered the flap shut. The small light illuminated the cooler and backpacks by the entrance. The air smelled like salt and canvas with a faint hint of burnt sugar. Amy crawled in next to me and I scooted closer, partly on reflex. We lay quietly. Outside, I could hear the ocean's steady crash. Kevin and Lisa finished zipping up their own tent next door, then settled in. I stared at the tent wall above my feet. Every sound seemed amplified now. The waves, the creak of the zipper, even my own heartbeat. A small fly buzzed once against the canvas, and I nearly jumped out of my skin before realizing it was nothing. I glanced at my watch by the lantern light. It was 1:10 a.m. I felt my eyes start to droop. Maybe I could finally relax. For a moment, I focused on Amy's breathing, which was calm and steady. I pictured morning sunlight through this tent and felt myself start to calm down. But just then, everything changed. A section of the tent wall right at my feet bowed outward as if something heavy were pushing against it. I jolted upright. My breath caught. On the other side of the fabric came a slow exhale, deliberate and low. I opened my eyes. There, just inches from me, two pale, unblinking eyes glared in at me through the tent wall. My blood ran cold. My whole world narrowed to those eyes on the other side of the canvas. Every muscle in my body locked up with terror. I felt Amy stir beside me. In a whisper, she said, "What is it?" But I couldn't answer. I was wide awake now, completely paralyzed by fear. My breathing grew shallow. I could feel the rough canvas against my cheek as those eyes stared unblinkingly. Time slowed. Every sound faded except the pounding of my heart. I blinked once, thinking it must be a trick of the light. But the eyes remained. They weren't animal or bird, they were human, cold and empty. My mind screamed at me to do something, to move, to speak, but my body wouldn't obey. Every instinct urged me to flee, but I was glued to the spot. All I could do was stare back, locked in a silent standoff with that eerie gaze. The world outside the tent vanished. It felt like the ocean, the forest. Even my friends all turned to a quiet backdrop to this terrifying moment. I couldn't draw a breath. My limbs felt like lead. In that dreadful silence, I realized everything had changed. My mind raced with questions. Was it human? What did this intruder want? The crashing waves and rustling grasses outside felt strangely distant now, as if the whole world was holding its breath with me. I felt Amy's hand tighten in mine. We lay there frozen, knowing we were absolutely alone. The flicker of the lantern cast eerie shadows behind me, but beyond the fabric there was only darkness and those unblinking eyes. In the back of my mind, I knew this night was far from over. We had to stay absolutely still and silent, Nothing would ever be the same after this. The eyes vanished. Just like that. Gone. One blink and they slipped back into the darkness. It was as if they'd never been there at all, but the feeling they left behind stayed with me like a sickness in my bones. Amy was whispering my name, asking me what we'd seen. I couldn't speak. I just stared at the tent wall, still faintly bulged from where the pressure had pushed in. The night outside returned to its usual sounds. Waves, wind, distant seagulls. But it all felt wrong now. Like the world had reset, pretending nothing had happened. There was someone, I finally choked out. Amy stiffened. What do you mean, someone? Someone was staring at us right outside. She turned to the tent flap and instinctively reached for the zipper. I grabbed her wrist. Don't. Not yet. We waited. 10 minutes passed, maybe more. We stayed frozen in silence, barely breathing. I strained my ears for footsteps, twigs snapping, anything. But there was nothing. Just wind, waves, that endless mocking calm. Eventually, I poked my head slowly out of the flap with a flashlight in hand. I swept the beam across the sand. Nothing. Not a footprint. Not a shadow. Just wind-stirred sand dunes and darkness swallowing everything beyond the reach of my light. I told Kevin and Lisa everything. We stood outside their tent, whispering like we were hiding from something that could hear us. Kevin didn't look convinced at first, but I could see the way his eyes darted toward the trees beyond the dunes. You sure it wasn't a dream or something? He asked. I wasn't even asleep, I said. They were real. They were human eyes. Lisa hugged herself. Do we need to leave? We all stood there for a moment, processing. It was 1:30 in the morning. The only road out was a winding trail. We had no intention of driving half asleep in pitch black. We agreed to stay awake in shifts, 2 people up at all times while the others rested inside the tent. Kevin and I took first watch. We dragged a beach chair out toward the dying embers of the fire pit and sat with our backs to the tents, scanning the dunes and brush. I gripped the flashlight like a weapon. Kevin held a rusted tent pole like a bat. For almost an hour, we didn't speak. Occasionally, Kevin would whisper something like, "That rock looks like a person, doesn't it?" And I'd nod, barely breathing. It's strange how the brain starts to invent things in silence. You begin to see people in every shadow, hear movement in the wind. But I wasn't imagining those eyes. I knew what I saw. Halfway through our watch, Kevin leaned in. Okay, I wasn't going to say this earlier, but I thought I saw something too. I turned to him, heart thudding. When we were all sitting by the fire earlier, right before you said you saw something in the dunes, I thought I saw someone standing farther up the beach, near the big driftwood log. But I looked again, and he was gone. I figured it was just my eyes playing tricks. We both turned toward the log. It was barely visible in the moonlight, lying like a bleached whale carcass just beyond the dunes. The perfect place for someone to hide behind. What if they've been watching us since we got here? I said aloud. Kevin swallowed. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Just then we both heard it. A clear crunch. A slow, deliberate footstep in the sand. Close. Too close. Kevin stood up instantly, flashlight trembling in his hand. I followed, scanning frantically toward the sound. It had come from behind us, near the tents. We spun around and both beams locked on Lisa, poking her head out of her tent flap. Sorry, she whispered. I heard something and panicked. My breath returned to me in a rush. Jesus, Lisa. But then, we heard something else. Not from Lisa, not from us. A quiet scraping sound, like fabric being pulled. A zipper, very slowly being tugged open. It wasn't from our tents. It came from the tree line. I turned and caught a glimpse. Someone crouched in the shadows, dressed in dark clothes, hunched low, fiddling with what looked like a backpack or a duffel bag. The flashlight beam hit him for less than a second before he dropped flat to the sand and vanished into the brush like a cockroach scurrying into darkness. Kevin ran forward 2 steps before stopping. "Do we chase him?" "No," I said, grabbing his arm. "We stay together." We all huddled back in the camp. This time, no one went to sleep. We sat in the larger tent, lantern on, staring at the walls like they might come alive again. I held the metal flashlight like it was a gun. "I want to leave at first light," Amy whispered. No one argued. The rest of the night dragged. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. Every pop from the fire pit made us jump. Around 4:30 a.m., just as the faintest hint of dawn colored the sky, Kevin's flashlight died. Then Amy's phone buzzed. She looked down and froze. "Someone airdrop me something." Her voice was shaking. I reached over and looked. Photo incoming. campeyes.jpg. The photo showed our camp from behind a sand dune just a few hours earlier. The fire was burning. All 4 of us were in the picture circled around it. The image had been taken from a distance. Whoever took it had been watching us in complete silence, hidden the entire time. None of us had heard a camera. None of us had seen movement. We were being watched. We left immediately. Threw our gear into the cars, barely folding anything. Drove out of the beach road with tires spitting sand behind us. We didn't even speak. Each of us stared out the window, scanning the forested road for movement. Back in town, we didn't call the police. What would we say? We weren't hurt. Nothing was stolen. There was no proof of anything. But we knew. Someone had followed us, watched us. And at some point in the night, they had been close enough to reach into our tent and stare right at us. The scar it left wasn't physical. It was the feeling of being prey, of realizing how vulnerable you truly are when you're far from safety, when no one is watching, when no one will hear you scream. I wish that was the end of it, but it wasn't. 2 days later, Lisa got a second photo. This one wasn't from the beach. It was from her apartment hallway, and in it was her front door. Taken from just a few feet away,